Hello and welcome to It's Another Watch. In today's video, I'm going to show you how you can take your SKX007 and breathe new life into it with a new dial and new hands. Let's get into it, shall we? So here is my SKX007 in question. This was a custom one that I built out of some parts that I had. And this one has unfortunately had a few bumps where I had to get a replacement bracelet for it. I had to change the handset out entirely because I had issues with the Heimdallr ones that I put on there. I even had to change the case back because I had used one that was designed for the black spacer rather than the NH36's grey movement spacer. And I even changed the bezel insert because I cracked the loom pip off it. So that was a shame, but this one is a nice fully loomed insert. Anyway, let me show you the parts that we're going to be putting on here, the hands and the new dial. And firstly, the dial. This is the SRPB51 Samurai dial with the printed text on it, rectangular indices and the larger indexes at 6, 12 and 9, and the texture of the dial is patterned rather than, say, matte finish or sunburst. These are the hands. I picked these up on eBay. I thought they might match the dial quite nicely. Loom's not so great on them, but they do have a nice sort of bevel line in the middle. I do have another set here that does have much better C3 loom, but they're flat. They don't have that nice bevel in the center, and the quality of the hands just isn't quite as nice, so I'm not going to use these. I'm going to use these white ones instead and see how it looks. So here are the tools. First off, a case back remover to get into the watch, then a hand puller to remove the hands. Then I've got some plastic tweezers that will be useful because they won't scratch anything. A plastic bag to put over the hands when we pull them off. This is a movement holder that's going to make it easier to work on the watch when it's out of the case. Some Rodico used for cleanup and placing the hands. Then this, I use this quite a lot. It's good for working on bracelets when it comes to pushing in the push pins, as well as sometimes pressing the lever to eject the crown and stem. Then I've got some cheap hand pushers that I just bought on eBay. The red one is for the hour, the blue for the minute, and the silver for the second hand. Then I'm going to be using some flush cutters here. They're good for removing the dial feet, but if you haven't got any of those, nail clippers work just as good. I'd also recommend these fine-tipped anti-static tweezers. I use these things all the time. And to keep the inside of your case and your parts dust-free, I would recommend one of these cans of compressed air. And I know that finger rolls are adequate for this kind of work, but I like to use rubber gloves. So, let's get started with this. We're going to take this case back off first, so that means taking out this pin. Put this somewhere safe. So just align the tool to remove the case back with the notches, hold the watch firmly, and then unscrew it. This can also work if you lay the watch down on the desk and apply downward force when trying to unscrew it. Obviously, once it's loose enough, you can use your hands to unscrew it the rest of the way. And then when we take it off, make sure that we've got the gasket as well. There it is, it's come off with it. So put that in a safe place, and we'll place the case back inside face down so that dust isn't settling on the underside of the glass. Now, we can unscrew the crown, ready to remove the movement. And once that's unscrewed, place it down on the desk. Make sure we can push up the tool down on this little lever here. I'm actually going to use my soldering tweezers for this because they have a nice fine tip and it's easier for me to show you what I'm doing with them. But there we go, lever's been pushed and the crown has been pulled out and ejected. So now I can just use that other tool to gently use one of these gaps to pry up the movement slightly so that when I turn over the watch, the movement will just fall straight out. And here's an advantage to using gloves instead of finger rolls. I can tip the movement straight into my hands. That way I'm not awkwardly holding another object against it as I flip and turn it with the potential to slip, or tipping it onto something where the movement might drop onto it. So now that I've got it placed in the movement holder, I'm just making sure that I have access to where the crown goes in, because obviously we'll be needing the crown to hack the movement, set the time, set the date, etc. for when we put the hands on. And I'm just waiting for the second hand to be at the 12, and then I can hack the movement. Then I'm just going to align the hands with the second hand at 12 o'clock, ready to pull them off with the hand pullers. So I'm just going to get that plastic bag and place it over the top of the hands. This is to protect them and the dial. Then making sure that the pullers have gone around the edges of the hands. Just going to press the handles of the pullers to cause them to push down on the center and pull the hands up from underneath. So with that done, we can take the dial off, and I'm just going to use these plastic tweezers to do it because they won't scratch the dial and they can just slip in between the gaps to separate the dial from the movement. As you can see here, these little dial feet is what goes through the holes on the movement to lock the dial into place. And this dial has 3.8 o'clock feet. The dial here that I'm using has 3 o'clock crown feet, so I'm going to have to remove them. Also, we don't need this day disc for the dial in question because it only has the date complication, but this day disc is just a cheap painted over one, as you can see, so I'm not really keen on using it in any other build, so for this time I'm just going to leave it on. So let's get the dial out of here, ready to take the dial feet off the bottom of it. Obviously, handle the dial with care. You don't want to get any scuffs on it, you don't want to get any smudges that you'd have to clean off, because the more you have to clean it, the more potential you have for damaging it. So, I'm just going to lay it face down on this silicone mat, and I'm going to take my flush cutters here, grab the edges of these dial feet, and just gently twist back and forth until the dial foot comes off. There we are. And I'm going to do the same thing with this one. And I'm being really delicate here. I'm not just yanking it left and right. I am being very subtle in the movement, so sometimes it can take a bit longer for one foot to come off than the other, depending on how strong the brass feet are. But there we are, those are off. So now we can use a file to file down those extra bits, just to make sure that it's nice and flat when it goes on the movement. And once you're happy with that, you can use a piece of Rodico to just dab away any of the filings, because we certainly don't want any of those getting into the movement. For the time being, I'm going to put that back in its case so that it's protected while we put the dial dots on the movement ring. I'm just using a bezel adhesive ring here and just cutting tiny little bits out of it to use as dial dots. So you don't have to specifically buy dial dots, you can just use these and they work just fine, so long as they're not too thick. And then I'm just using my fine tip tweezers to pull the dial dots off and stick them onto the side here, gently nudging it off the end of the tweezer with my finger and then nudging it around with the tweezers until it's in place, making sure that it's not obstructing the date disc and it's not tipping over the edge of the movement spacer too much. Then we can take off the covers that protect the adhesive if they haven't already come off, ready to stick the dial on top. So with this one, we're aligning it at the 3.8 o'clock position, which means the date window is going to be over at Monday the 5th. And when I'm putting the dial on like this, I'm looking at two things. Is the date window centered around the number, and how is the alignment of the circle in the center of the dial around the cannon pinion? And as you can see, 3.8 o'clock crown there because it's just above the 4 o'clock. So now that the dial's on, I'm going to check the alignment with the other numbers on the date disc to make sure that it's consistently centered around the date. Oh, that's a shame. There's a scuff between the 1 and the 2 there, and I don't have any sort of ink-like markers to cover that up. Oh well, let's push the crown back in so that we can remove it properly by pressing down the lever, and I just pull the crown out with my teeth while holding it in the air. Right, so we're going to case it up and make sure that the chapter ring aligns with the dial, and if it doesn't, we're going to have to pull it out and rotate the dial, case it back up, check it again, and repeat this process until those indices are aligned with the chapter ring as perfect as we can get them. And as you can see, it's not quite right, so let's do that. So it's quite simple to do. I just hold the movement in my hands carefully and then just grab the edges of the dial and rotate it in the direction I need to, slightly further than necessary because it will spring back a little bit with the elasticity of the dial dots. Yeah, I can already see it's way off now, so we're just rotating it again, and it's just a matter of doing it again and again and again until we get it lined up perfectly with the chapter ring. Sometimes it helps to do the rotation and then actually hold it in place a little bit to let the dial dots set so they don't spring back as far, but it's all about trial and error here. Sometimes this process can take 10-15 minutes, other times it can take an hour, but after quite a while rotating the dial to make it absolutely perfect, I'm happy with this alignment, so we can move on to the next step, and that's putting the hands on. So the first thing I'm going to do is pull the crown out to the time setting position, and then I'm going to roll the time over until the date snaps over to the next day exactly, so we know we can line up the hands at the 12 o'clock position. I like to use Rodico to pick up and place the hands because then I'm not having to worry about delicately applying pressure so that the tweezers don't drop the hand, and I just sort of hook it onto the cannon pinion and then delicately wiggle and pull the Rodico away until it drops down. And I'm just using the plastic tip of the hour hand pusher to gently nudge it into alignment. And then once I'm satisfied it's aligned, we can go ahead and push the hour hand down with some gentle, as even as possible pressure so that it slides down into place, and then if necessary to fix the leveling of it, we can tip it forward or backwards, and then we can check to make sure that it's functioning correctly. And it's ticking over about 12 o'clock, which seems fine, so then we can go ahead and put the minute hand on. So same again, using the Rodico to put it into place, then using the hand pusher to gently nudge it into alignment, and then pressing it into place with the hand pusher. I have done this before where I've set the hour hand to 6 o'clock before aligning the minute hand at the 12, but it just depends on the hands really. And just in case the alignment goes off, you can sometimes give the hand a little nudge and it will not affect the hour hand. And I'm just leveling it off, checking the spacing. It looks like the tip of the minute hand is resting on the hour hand, so I'm just going to try and tip it up from the back, and then I can check the spacing again. And it actually looks like the hand I've got here is bent. I'm not showing it on screen here because I did this off camera, but it is bent. So I'm actually going to bend it so that it's level again by using a dial protector here, just placing it under the hand and gently tipping up against it, just to sort of curve the hand back to a more straight alignment. And look at that, that's much better than it was. I know I didn't show it, but it was perfectly spaced at the cannon pinion, but touching the hour hand at the edge, so I needed to straighten out the curve. Anyway, now I'm checking the alignment at 6 o'clock, and it just looks really off aligned. So what I'm doing to fix that is holding the hour hand in place with one plastic pusher and nudging the minute hand with the other in an attempt to rotate the hands around the cannon pinion that they're pressed onto. And yeah, I'm still not quite happy with that, so I'm just going to give it an extra nudge here just to see if I can fix the alignment without having to remove the hands, because it is a bit of a tedious job having to take the hands off and do them again when you might be able to get away with just nudging them. Let's have a look. Yeah, that's looking better now. The nudging has worked. It doesn't always work, but in this instance it has, so we can finally give the hands a little clean with some Rodico, and then it'll be ready to put the second hand on. So I like to put my face level with the desk looking sideways onto the little pin in the middle that the second hand goes onto, and then I'm sort of just nudging it around into place until it sort of sits on top, and then I give it a gentle press on to make sure that it is on, and then I commit to pressing it down with much more firm pressure to make sure that it really slides onto that pin. And I'm just pressing here to make sure that it's firmly on as far as it needs to go. And then I'm just going to check the functionality of it. It seems to be working. So then I can pull the crown out and make sure that it's not conflicting with any of the other hands, and it seems fine. And then just to be certain of that, I just give it a few rotations, and we can check when the date ticks over just a few minutes before 12. I'm happy with that. So we can give the second hand a little clean with some Rodico to get rid of any smudges. And then after that, we can just spray everything with some compressed air to get rid of any dust and particles from both what we've worked on here and inside the case. Then we can just pull the crown out and case it back up. So I'm just using a UV torch here just to highlight any specks that might be on the dial, and I've got a soft brush there to brush them off. And then I'm going to use some compressed air inside the case to get rid of any dust inside there. And then I'm just going to give the movement a bit of a spritz as well. Then we can take the movement out of the movement holder. And then, like I've said before, I just use a tool to press down on the lever, and then I pull the crown out with my teeth while holding it in the air. Then I'm going to place it on a raised surface like this bottle lid that I've shown before that allows me to case it up, and then we can put the crown back in and the case back on if all is well. And give it a little push from the middle to make sure the movement's seated in the case, and then we can reinsert the crown and stem. So I'm just checking the functionality here to make sure that I can set the date and the time so that the stem has been inserted properly and that there's no conflictions with the hand now that it's inside the case. And now that we're done with that, we can put the case back gasket in the recess where it sits, and I like to use the tweezers for this. And I'll use Rodico to dab away any notable fibers or particles, and then we can screw the case back on. I like to reverse thread it first so that the threads lock in, and then screw it the correct way to screw it down in. Then we can screw the crown in as well. And then tighten the case back with our case back tool. And then all that's left to do is to reattach the pin to the bracelet, and it's ready. So just push the push pin in there, slide it back into the micro adjust slot there, and it's done. There we are. There's the modded SKX007 with the new dial and hands. That's not looking too shabby, is it? Quite a nice combination with the dial and hands there. And if you weren't using dial dots because you had an appropriate 3.8 o'clock crown dial for this whole process would have gone even faster. Still, let's get this in some different light and have a better look at it. So there you have it. That's how you can potentially freshen up the look of your SKX007 just with a new dial and hands. It's a bit more advanced than, say, changing the bezel insert, and you need a few more tools to do it. But what is good about this method is it'll work for a whole range of watches that use movements similar to Seiko's NH36, like the NH35, the 7S26 and 7S36, and the 4R35 and 36, because they share the dimensions for attaching the dials and the hands. So stay tuned for more videos. I've had some developments with this watch, and although I've just put in the work to change the dial and hands on this, I finally got the 2017 62 mass dial that I've been looking for forever. So this is getting a big swap in the near future. Stay tuned for that. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.